Our final miscreants tonight are pulled from a collection of fairy tales I've been writing over a number of years. And they are a totally different sort. There were once two brothers who lived by the sea. One was tall and handsome. The other was not so tall, for his back was bent, and not so handsome, for his skin was splotched. Yet for all that, they were twins. In a mansion they lived by the coast of the sea, where the waves broke and the fish would play. When the tide came in, they would go to the sea in a boat, which they kept in a dock on the beach, and drop their nets into the water. When the sun began to descend for the night, they drew in their nets, filled with the foolish fish of the deep, who had sought to look at the sun, and went home. Large was their house by the sea, a mansion which their father had built. He had finished it on the very last twilight before the fall turned to winter, in the first year of his sons' lives. He had built their boat as well. On the day they turned 13, he had taken his boat out to the sea after the sun had set, and never returned, though the boat had drifted back on the high tide underneath a dark moon, with nets filled with fish. Large was their home by the sea, with 3 floors and so many rooms that they would never need to see each other at all if they chose. But they stayed close together instead, for they loved each other more than space. Together they would row the oars of their boat a stroke at a time, carrying themselves out to sea and then back to the land. Together they would lift up their heavy nets of fish and carry them into their mansion, and together they would slice the fish open and scale their bodies and clean their skins, and together they would roast them over an open flame and eat, staring into each other's eyes. Not a word would they speak, for they were closer than words, and together they would sleep in the great bed of their father and dream the same dreams. So close were they that some days they could not even tell which of them was which, and some days they were quite certain that they became each other, so that the one who was tall and handsome was crooked and hideous, and the one who had been hideous was tall and fair to see. The older they grew, the closer they became, though they looked less and less alike, so that sometimes a whole week would go by when they could not tell who was who, and each brother would tremble to look in the mirror, wondering if he was hideous, and hesitate to stare into his brother's eyes, because he thought he might find them handsome. Soon the brother who had once always been handsome felt the terror of scabs which would not open and ooze during the night, while his brother who had always been hideous found that sometimes he could enjoy the sensation of sheets upon his skin. Now both brothers knew the pain of itches which crawled up and down the skin like a spider in its web, and both knew the joy of its relief. Once the handsome brother had always known that he must take care of his ugly twin, for if the people of the cities nearby should ever find him, they would not be kind. But now the brothers did not know who was handsome, and they did not know if one of them secretly wished to leave, and they were scared. And when a year of this uncertainty had come and gone, with fear and deformity coming and going to each of them like the changing moon, they sat together one night over a dinner of fish they had caught and killed in silence that day, and then they each lowered their heads, as if something inside them had broken. "I cannot go on this way," one brother whispered. "I cannot bear this life," hissed the other twin. And they could not tell who had spoken first. "I only want to run away forever," said one of the brothers, "and I cannot abide the fear that you will leave me." "I dream and hope that things will always be as they are," said the other, "and I am terrified that you will stay." And they did not know which of them had spoken, and which of them had replied. Then they were both blinded by long, salty tears, which they felt in their brother's eyes, and they both turned their heads away. And they could not tell which of them it was who grabbed the long knives which they used to cut the fish, or which of them had run out of the kitchen and up the stairs to their mother's room, where a sword had been hung by the window. They only knew that each clutched his weapon and wailed. And each brother was too terrified to approach his twin, though too filled with longing and fear to stay where he was. So they circled around the great mansion for as long as they could, one carrying the knives which had fed them, and the other the sword that had belonged to their mother, until they both grew weary and hid. The brother who might have been handsome in a closet, the brother who might have been hideous beneath the basement stairs, and fell asleep. And again they dreamed the same dreams. They dreamed the same dreams of a vast cliff which they had run off of, thinking they could fly. And when they woke, at the same time, The twin hiding below the basement stairs, who might have been handsome, took the longest way around the mansion to reach the closet at its top. And the brother who had been hidden in the closet spiraled around the mansion until he reached the basement, and there each stabbed at the place where his brother had been, again and again and again. When they were finished, there was no more and no less there than there ever had been, and they were each satisfied that they had accomplished something. Then, thinking that now he had progressed beyond his history, the brother with the knives went directly to the front door of the mansion. The brother with the sword, thinking he had matured past his anger and uncertainty, ran to the back door of the mansion as quickly as he could. There they stopped at the thresholds, one leading out to the ocean, the other to the garden, and they waited. Just for a moment, the brother at the front door told himself. To smell the scent of the wood. Just for a moment, thought the brother at the back door, to make time to say goodbye. Moments later, a great breeze blew in from the sea, pushing the brother at the front door in towards the house and the brother at the back door out towards the garden. And still they did not move. The breeze blew across their bodies, and they both grew cold, and the eyes of the brother at the front door began to water from staring at the sun, which held high over the beach, and the brother at the door to the garden began to bat away mosquitoes who lived in the pear trees. But they both were afraid and did not move. Then, at last, they each shut the doors fast, so that the sound of one closing was echoed immediately by the slam of the other. And they raised their weapons up, higher than before, and went to where they knew their brother was not, one returning to the kitchen to look in the cabinets, the other to the bedroom to look under the bed. So they looked for each other, in the places they knew they had never gone. One brother went to their father's wine cellar and hunted viciously around the dusty bottles. The other crawled through the library, twisting and turning and stabbing at every little noise. "I will kill you," called out one brother into a corner where he knew the sound would never be heard. "Please forgive me," cried the other through a window which led to nowhere. But neither of them knew which had said which. Then at last, when the pressure of the hunt and the guilt and the fury they bore had taken their toll, the two brothers again hid far away from each other and slept. The second time in their lives they had not slept together, and still they dreamed the same dream. They dreamed that each was held in the middle of the ocean, with salt water above them and below, and that he had forgotten how to swim. And when they awoke, the brother who may have had knives called up from the cellar to the top of the mansion, "I cannot live like this." And the brother who may have had a sword called down from the attic, "It is too painful, too much." And the brother who may have had knives and may have been in the basement crawled out and began walking to the main stair. "You are too ugly," he shouted. "I'm sorry, but I can never stand to be that again." "I know," called out the other twin, who may have had a sword and been hiding in the attic, but was certainly stepping towards the main stairs. "I am too handsome. It is too much to lose. No one could lose so much." "I love you," cried the first brother, as he began to walk up the stairs. "I love you," called the other brother, as he began to walk down them. "I held you in my arms once," they both shouted, "and you wept and cursed that the world was too cruel." "It is not fair," they each whispered as they stepped across the stairs, "that we should ever have come so close." Then the twin with the knife saw his brother, who was so beautiful and so terrible, and stabbed towards the throat. And the twin with the sword saw his brother, who was so wonderful and so hideous, and he thrust towards the heart. And one of them screamed, though they could not tell which one, and so they both screamed. And they wept as each felt the blood of one, and the ripping of flesh that might have been handsome, might have been hideous, but was certainly torn and red. And the twin who was dying held the twin who was not, and he cried the same tears he had when first he ran from his brother, and screamed, "How can I outlive you?" But the dying brother could no longer speak, and only had the strength to run his hands through his brother's hair, gently, comforting, generous with his last breaths, for he felt as though he had found the perfect place to hide. Then he collapsed, and his hand grew stiff around his brother's forehead, and no longer comforting. And for the first time, his brother knew nothing of what his twin was seeing, and he wailed and cried and felt a loneliness that would never abate, while the sun went up and the moon went down, until at last he had cried and shivered and moaned so often that he had no more strength. And then, when he had no more strength for grief, he felt at his face and the skin of his arms, and he asked, "Am I beautiful?"